Man enters a crowded room. Nothing seems unusual. People smile. They talk. Someone laughs across the room. Glasses touch. Conversations continue. But one person isn't listening only to the words. He notices a smile disappear a fraction too quickly. A hand that was relaxed suddenly tightens. Then someone mentions a name. For half a second, a face changes. And then it's gone. Most people miss moments like these because they're listening for meaning in sentences. But human behavior has another layer. People spend enormous energy controlling what they say. They choose words, edit stories, soften opinions. Behavior is harder to manage perfectly every second. Not because the body always tells the truth. It doesn't. Crossed arms don't automatically mean defensiveness. Looking away doesn't prove deception. Nervousness doesn't mean guilt. What matters is change. A sudden shift can reveal that something inside the interaction has shifted too. Attention, emotion, uncertainty, discomfort. The mistake is believing you already know why. A strategist doesn't rush to interpret. He notices first. Most people hear the sentence. A strategist watches what changes around it. Imagine someone who has been speaking comfortably for 10 minutes. Their hands move freely. Their answers come easily. Their eye contact is natural. Then you ask one ordinary question. Their hands stop. Their answer becomes shorter. Their breathing changes. That doesn't prove anything by itself. But now you know where to pay attention. This leads to the first rule of observation. Before you study change, establish normal. The next time you enter a conversation, resist the urge to analyze immediately. Watch. How quickly does this person normally speak? How much eye contact do they naturally make? Are their hands usually animated or still? Do they answer immediately or pause before most responses? That is their baseline. Because a behavior that looks suspicious in one person may be completely normal in another. The useful clue isn't the gesture. It's the departure from the pattern. And once you stop hunting for universal signs and start noticing changes, conversations begin to look different. You notice the pause that wasn't there before, the smile that suddenly requires effort, the calm person who becomes unusually animated around one subject. But sometimes the clearest clue is not what changes slowly. It's what changes far too much. The question is almost meaningless. Did you finish it? Two people are sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe. Until now, the conversation has been effortless. Then the question lands. For half a second, something changes. The smile freezes, the fingers around the coffee cup tighten, and the answer arrives almost too quickly. Yeah, of course. That reaction is interesting. But it is not proof. It does not automatically mean guilt. It does not prove deception. And it certainly doesn't give you permission to invent a hidden motive. The better question is quieter. Why did this topic produce more emotion than everything surrounding it? Psychologists sometimes describe this through emotional salience. Certain subjects carry more psychological weight because they touch something personally significant. Fear, shame, insecurity, excitement, grief, status, an unresolved experience. When conversation reaches one of those areas, attention can sharpen and behavior may shift. But the reaction only tells you that something became emotionally important. It does not tell you why. Imagine a coworker who has been completely relaxed during a meeting. Then someone asks about a missed deadline. Suddenly, their voice becomes sharper. Their explanation gets faster. They begin defending decisions nobody accused them of making. The amateur observer thinks, they're hiding something. The strategist thinks, this subject changed their behavior, and waits. Instead of accusing them, lower the emotional temperature. Say, I'm not blaming you, I just want to understand what happened. Then watch. Perhaps their shoulders relax. Their speech slows, and they explain that they're overwhelmed by something you knew nothing about. Or perhaps their story becomes increasingly inconsistent. Either way, you learn more by reducing pressure than by increasing it. Because accusation contaminates observation. Once people feel attacked, even innocent behavior can become defensive. So collect information before you create conclusions. Notice intensity. Compare it with context. Then wait for repetition. One reaction is a moment. Repeated reactions under similar conditions begin to form a pattern. A reaction can tell you where to look. But sometimes, the most revealing moment happens when nobody says anything at all. Two people are talking. One keeps speaking. The other simply stops rescuing the conversation from silence. At first, nothing happens. Then comes the pause. 1 second, 2, And suddenly the atmosphere feels different. The speaker looks away, adds another detail, corrects something they just said, then asks a question nobody needed answered. Silence has introduced uncertainty. Human conversation normally follows an invisible rhythm. We speak, receive a response, and use that response to understand where we stand. Remove it, and some people become uncomfortable. They begin filling the empty space. Not because silence magically forces people to reveal secrets. It doesn't, but discomfort changes behavior. People may explain more, reveal more context, repeat themselves. So the observer doesn't use silence as intimidation. He uses it as space. Space for the other person to think. Space for behavior to unfold. And perhaps most importantly, space for himself not to react. Imagine you're negotiating. Someone makes an offer. Your instinct is to answer immediately. Instead, remain relaxed. Pause for 3 seconds. Don't stare. Don't perform dominance. Just think. Sometimes the other person says nothing. Sometimes they clarify the offer. Sometimes they improve it before you've even responded. And sometimes they reveal what actually matters to them. I could probably move on the deadline. Now you've learned something you might never have discovered by rushing to speak. Try something simpler today. When someone finishes a sentence, wait 1 extra beat before answering. Not dramatically, just long enough to prevent your first impulse from becoming your automatic response. Notice what happens. Notice them, but also notice yourself. Do you feel pressure to speak? To reassure? To defend? To prove you understood? Silence can reveal your patterns too. And that is why silence without observation is useless. Used carelessly, it becomes theater. Used deliberately, it creates room for information. Because the goal isn't to make people uncomfortable. It's to stop covering every meaningful pause with noise. But silence becomes even more interesting when the words say one thing, and the behavior quietly says another. I'm fine. The words sound calm, almost convincing, but the shoulders remain tense. Eye contact disappears. The conversation continues, yet something has changed. And later, the actions tell a different story. Psychologists often look at congruence, how different channels of communication align. Words, tone, behavior, actions over time. But inconsistency does not automatically mean deception. People are complicated. Someone can say they're fine because they're confused, embarrassed, protecting their privacy, or because they genuinely haven't understood what they're feeling yet. So one contradiction proves very little. Repeated contradictions are different. Think of information as a hierarchy. Words are one source, behavior is another. But repeated actions across time often tell you more than a single sentence ever could. Imagine someone tells you, "You can always count on me." It's reassuring. Then life becomes difficult, and they disappear. Later, they make the same promise. Another difficult moment arrives. They disappear again. Don't argue with the promise. Compare it with the pattern. Because the important question isn't whether their words sounded sincere. It's whether reality repeatedly supports them. When words and actions conflict, resist the urge to confront immediately. Ask yourself, which one has been more consistent over time? Then respond to reality, not potential. Carl Jung explored the idea that human beings develop social faces, versions of ourselves shaped partly by what the world expects from us. That doesn't make those versions fake, but they are incomplete. There are parts of personality that remain less visible. Under pressure, disappointment, fear, or conflict, those less polished parts may become easier to see. This doesn't mean you should diagnose people. It means you should remain curious about contradictions. The generous person who becomes controlling when generosity isn't rewarded. The confident person who collapses when ignored. The calm person who changes completely when challenged. Don't label them from one moment. Watch what repeats. Because sometimes the contradiction isn't a lie. Sometimes it's the distance between who someone wants to appear to be and who they become when the mask slips.
The room is full of people. Soft music. Expensive clothes. Carefully measured laughter. At the center of it all, one person seems effortless. Warm. Charismatic. Perfectly composed. They remember names. Ask thoughtful questions. Laugh at exactly the right moment. Then they leave the room. The door closes. And their face changes. The smile disappears. The shoulders drop. The performance is over. Carl Jung gave us a useful way to think about this: the persona. The social face we present to the world. And everyone has one. Professionalism is a kind of mask. Politeness can be a mask. Even confidence can sometimes be a mask. That doesn't make people fake. Social life requires adaptation. The more interesting question is how dramatically someone changes depending on who's watching. Because those changes can reveal what the audience represents to them. Status. Approval. Belonging. Control. Admiration. Imagine someone at an expensive restaurant. The waiter makes a small mistake. Their voice becomes cold. Their patience disappears. Then an influential person approaches the table. Instantly, everything changes. The posture opens. The smile returns. The voice becomes warm. Most people notice the charm. Watch the contrast. Because behavior around someone powerful may be carefully managed. Behavior around someone who appears unable to offer status, opportunity, or approval can involve much lower stakes. And sometimes, low-stakes behavior tells you more than high-stakes performance. Try this the next time you're observing someone socially. Don't only watch how they treat the most important person in the room. Watch how they treat the waiter, the assistant, the stranger, the person they don't need to impress. But remain careful. One impatient moment does not define someone's character. People have bad days. They become tired, distracted, overwhelmed. Again, the principle is repetition. Context. Change. Pattern. Because the goal isn't to catch people wearing masks. We all wear them. The goal is to understand when the mask changes. And what consistently makes it change. And once you begin noticing who changes around power, you start seeing something even more revealing. Who desperately needs to control it. Control rarely announces itself as fear. Sometimes it looks like authority, precision, responsibility. A person needs every detail confirmed, every decision approved, every outcome anticipated. But controlling behavior can come from many places. Fear, uncertainty, anxiety, habit, status, even genuine responsibility. So don't diagnose the person. Study the pattern. Because what someone works hardest to control can sometimes reveal what they most fear becoming unpredictable. Sun Tzu understood a version of this centuries ago. Good strategy begins with observation. What does an opponent protect? What do they avoid? What causes them to abandon patience? Under pressure, priorities become visible. Not because every vulnerability should be exploited, but because pressure reveals what matters. Imagine a manager who insists on approving every tiny decision. Calling them controlling teaches you almost nothing. Instead, change the question. What happens when they receive information late? What happens when an employee acts independently? Which decisions produce irritation? And which produce genuine fear? Perhaps they don't need control over everything. Perhaps they need control over anything that could make them personally accountable. Now the pattern is becoming clearer. And if someone tries to pull you into a struggle for control, don't automatically resist harder. Slow the interaction down. Ask, what outcome are you most concerned about? That question changes the battlefield. Instead of fighting over who has authority, you're asking what the authority is trying to protect. Sometimes the answer is reputation. Sometimes money. sometimes certainty, sometimes simply the fear of being surprised. And now you're dealing with the concern, not wrestling with its surface behavior. But there is another side to control: your own predictability. If irritation always makes you argue, if criticism always makes you defend yourself, if rejection always makes you chase, then someone doesn't need to control your decisions directly. They only need to trigger the reaction they've already learned to expect. The more emotionally predictable you are, the easier you are to control. And one of the fastest ways to discover what someone is protecting is to listen carefully to what they repeatedly attack in others. Someone keeps criticizing the same kind of person: the weak, the arrogant, the needy, the dishonest, the attention seeker. Different faces, different situations. But somehow, the accusation is always the same. Carl Jung's idea of projection offers one possible explanation. Sometimes, qualities we strongly dislike, fear, deny, or struggle to recognize in ourselves become especially noticeable when we see them in other people. But projection is not a universal answer. Sometimes criticism is simply accurate. Someone behaves arrogantly, and another person correctly notices it. What deserves attention is repetition combined with emotional intensity. Ask yourself, what kinds of behavior does this person criticize most often? Then ask something more interesting. Why does this particular trait seem to carry so much emotion? Imagine someone who constantly complains that everyone else is desperate for attention. Don't immediately conclude they secretly want attention. That's psychology used as a weapon, not observation. Instead, watch what happens when someone else receives praise. Do they celebrate them? Become unusually quiet? Change the subject? Now watch what happens when they're ignored. Again, no single response proves anything. You're collecting information. Because good psychological observation doesn't give you permission to invent motives. It gives you better questions. And better questions create understanding. The moment psychology becomes a tool for proving you're smarter than someone else, you've stopped observing them clearly. Your ego has entered the experiment. So resist the temptation to diagnose. Notice. Compare. Wait. Let patterns earn your conclusions. Criticism can show you what someone repeatedly notices in other people. But there is another signal that can be even more revealing: defensiveness. Because criticism points outward. Defensiveness begins when attention suddenly turns inward. And sometimes the answer tells you very little. The reaction to being asked tells you where the emotional pressure lives. At the center of the crowd, they look powerful. Everyone is watching. People laugh at their stories. Their voice carries across the room. From a distance, it looks like confidence. Then the attention moves somewhere else. And something changes. The smile becomes tighter. They interrupt more often. A conversation about someone else's success somehow becomes a story about theirs. Attention-seeking isn't automatically insecurity. Human beings naturally want recognition. Belonging matters. Being seen matters. The useful question is not, do they enjoy attention? It's, what happens when recognition is removed? Because there is a difference between enjoying attention and depending on it. Watch for patterns. Someone repeatedly interrupts stories to redirect the conversation toward themselves. Achievements become slightly larger with every retelling. Being ignored suddenly creates conflict. Their eyes constantly scan the room for reactions. Again, one behavior proves nothing. But repetition under similar conditions gives you something worth observing. Imagine a group conversation. One person repeatedly brings every subject back to themselves. Don't compete. Don't confront them. Change the distribution of attention. Turn towards someone else and ask, "What do you think?" Then observe. Does the first person relax and listen? Do they interrupt? Do they immediately create another reason to become central? You're not trying to expose them. You're observing what happens when status temporarily moves elsewhere. Because people often reveal their relationship with status when they're no longer receiving it. And this brings us to the most important principle in everything we've examined. No single signal is enough. Silence is ambiguous. Defensiveness is ambiguous. Criticism is ambiguous. Eye contact is ambiguous. Control is ambiguous. Attention-seeking is ambiguous. Taken alone, each can mislead you. The real skill is combining context across time. What was normal? What changed? What triggered the change? Did it happen again? And does the same structure appear in different situations? Because observation becomes useful only when isolated moments begin connecting. A single moment can mislead you. But repeated structure is much harder to ignore. Reading people was never about memorizing gestures. It was never about deciding that crossed arms mean resistance, or that looking away means deception. And it was never about pretending you can see inside another person's mind. The real skill is quieter. Pattern recognition. Establish the baseline. Notice the change. Consider the context. Watch for repetition. Compare words with actions. Then, wait before deciding what any of it means. Imagine you've known someone for several weeks. One uncomfortable interaction tells you almost nothing. But time passes. And something begins repeating. Whenever accountability appears, they become defensive. Around powerful people, they become unusually warm. When attention moves elsewhere, they become cold. When others are watching, they become extraordinarily generous. But when there is nothing to gain, that generosity disappears. Now you're no longer looking at one gesture. You're looking at structure. Still, it isn't a diagnosis. It isn't proof of some hidden personality. It is information. And information becomes useful when you resist the temptation to turn it into certainty too quickly. So before deciding what someone's behavior means, ask 4 questions. Is this normal for them? What changed immediately before it? Has it happened more than once? And most importantly, do their actions support my interpretation? Those 4 questions protect you from 2 dangerous extremes. Naivety, where you ignore patterns because you want to believe the words. And paranoia, where every movement becomes evidence of something sinister. Real observation lies between them. Patient, precise, curious. Because the greatest observers are not the people who judge fastest. They're the ones who remain curious longest. They understand that human beings are complicated. Context changes us. Fear changes us. Status changes us. Love changes us. Pressure changes us. And sometimes, we don't fully understand our own behavior. So observe without becoming suspicious of everyone. Notice without becoming obsessed. And remember the principle beneath everything we've explored. One action means almost nothing. A pattern reveals far more. Most people listen for the truth in what someone says. A strategist waits and watches what they repeatedly become.